when I was on the space station, half a year long, just looking at the Earth, seeing the changes of seasons, seeing probably 80% of the Earth at different times of the year. It's just a remarkable thing to see the beauty of the Earth, the amazing things, not only on the Earth, but above the Earth. For example, we would look down on thunderstorms, and you could see the tops of the thunderstorms illuminated by the lightning. You have these glowing orbs of thunderclouds, and you're looking down and you see the tops of those. It was phenomenal. We would look down and see meteors. It was wild. And then the other thing was the aurora, and the aurora was just amazing too. Out of this world, I guess.
Welcome to the Lay of the Land podcast, where we are exploring what people are building in Cleveland and throughout Northeast Ohio. I am your host, Jeffrey Stern, and today I had the absolute privilege of speaking with Carroll Walz, an astronaut, a pioneer of space exploration, and a Clevelander. As an astronaut, Carroll is a veteran of 4 space flights, logging a total of 231 days in outer space and performing 3 spacewalks over that time. A physicist by training with degrees from Kent State and John Carroll University, Carroll made his way to NASA by way of the Air Force, where he served as a flight test engineer and managed all engineering activities related to the F-16 avionics and armaments. At NASA, he was a mission specialist on STS-51 in 1993, an orbiter flight engineer on STS-65 in 1994, a mission specialist on STS-79 in 1996, and then ultimately served 196 days in outer space as a flight engineer on ISS Expedition 4 in 2001 and 2002. Carroll also later served as the director for the Advanced Capabilities Division in the Exploration Systems Mission Directorate at NASA headquarters in Washington, D.C., where he was responsible for a broad range of activities, including human research, technology development, nuclear power and propulsion, and the lunar robotic exploration programs to support the vision for space exploration. He retired from NASA in December of 2008 to pursue work as a leader in the private sector at Orbital ATK and Oceaneering Space Systems. To say this was an awesome conversation for me would be the understatement of this whole podcast. Carroll and I got to unpack the rigorous path to becoming an astronaut, the unique experience of living and working in outer space, the rare perspective gained by seeing our fragile planet from above, and the sense of awe and interconnectedness that only a handful of people on Earth have ever experienced in the history of humanity. We talk about the challenges faced during his missions, transitioning back to life on Earth, the private sector and the business of outer space, international collaboration, being in the only astronaut band, and a whole lot more, reflecting on his remarkable career and experience. So please enjoy this wonderful conversation with Carroll Walz. Lay of the Land is brought to you and is proudly sponsored by Roundstone Insurance. Headquartered in Rocky River, Ohio, Roundstone shares Lay of the Land's same passion for bold ideas and lasting impact from our community's entrepreneurs, innovators, and leaders. Since 2005, Roundstone has pioneered a self-funded captive health insurance model that delivers robust savings for small and medium-sized businesses. They are part of the solution to rising healthcare costs, helping employers offer affordable, high-quality care while driving job creation and economic growth throughout Northeast Ohio. Like many of the voices featured on Lay of the Land, including Roundstone's founder and CEO Mike Schroeder, Roundstone believes entrepreneurship, innovation, and community are the cornerstones of progress. To learn more about how Roundstone is transforming employee health benefits by empowering employers to save thousands in per employee per year healthcare costs, please visit roundstoneinsurance.com. Roundstone Insurance, built for entrepreneurs, backed by innovation, committed to Cleveland. So I have to say, I am incredibly grateful to have you on the podcast today. I have personally a deep admiration for astronauts and your cadre of peers and what you represent, which to me, I think is kind of the best of humanity. I think there's a good reason why so many children would answer the question, what do you want to be when you grow up, with astronaut? Although maybe today, unfortunately, it's skewed more towards influencers.
Yes.
But that aside, listening to astronauts describe the nature of your work, I'm always amazed how humble, intelligent, multifaceted, interdisciplinary you all are, and just the courage that it takes to explore the unknown and literally the frontier of science and what we know. So I just wanted to start expressing that I'm very excited to have the opportunity to speak with you and learn more about your perspective and reflections on the whole experience.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I'm happy to share my perspectives because it's interesting. I've seen the human spaceflight business change significantly over the years, and
Yep.
it really, in some ways, it's kind of scary, but in other ways, it's exciting to see private astronaut missions doing some really cool things. And yeah, it's a very exciting time right now.
Yeah. And we'll certainly unpack the business behind all of it. But I wanted to start with when you were a kid, were you one of those children growing up in Cleveland, hoping one day to be an astronaut?
Absolutely, that was the thing when I was growing up. It was the sweet spot for our kids seeing heroic astronauts doing some crazy stuff on rockets that would blow up on the on the launch pad. And so I remember seeing Alan Shepard, John Glenn, the whole Gemini program, and then of course into the Apollo program. I was already in high school watching these things happen on the east side of Cleveland. So it was really cool and it really made an impression on me as far as, wow, this would be something to really aspire to if I could just figure it out. And so I started working on that. I was very fortunate. Probably the baseline requirement for astronauts are being good at science, being good at math. I was those things. And so it allowed me to kind of work my way toward that goal, not knowing really whether I would be successful or not, but it certainly gave me at least a few things to shoot for. Most, those early astronauts were military veterans. I kind of worked my way toward a commission in the Air Force is what I selected, and then from there, working my way, meeting people who had applied to become space shuttle astronauts and doing what they did, following their footsteps. That was then the closest I had to a path to get to where I wanted to go. So it was amazing.
When you and I first met, you mentioned this kind of remarkable lineage and concentration of astronauts and aerospace leaders from Ohio. Don Thomas, Ron Sega, Mike Foreman, Gene Kranz. You mentioned John Glenn, Neil Armstrong. What is going on in Ohio that we have so many astronauts here?
I don't know. It must be in that Lake Erie water. And we didn't even know it. But yes, a lot of astronauts from the local area, especially in those early days. And I think maybe it was just the population was bigger in Ohio, and I think the schools were just really really good, and it just worked out that way. Don Thomas, he went to Cleveland Heights High. I went to Brush. We were basically neighbors. Graduated the same year from high school. He went to Case. I graduated from Kent. And I ended up with John Carroll for a while too. So we were basically local guys growing up at the same time. We were both selected to become astronauts at the same time. So it was really, really interesting. And then Ron Sega, he was a little bit ahead of us, but basically he graduated from Nordonia High School. So it was really kind of a cool thing. We all showed up at the same time with a couple other folks from Ohio in our class. So we had a pretty good concentration just in our group 13.
Yeah. But you mentioned it was kind of a matter of figuring out how to do it and what it might take. What is it like to become an astronaut? What does it actually take?
Well, it's a funny thing. So I graduated from Brush High. I had a great teacher, Mr. Ike, who was my physics teacher. And so he got me hooked on physics. I was a physics major, started at John Carroll, went to Kent State to be able to not only get the degree, but also to join the ROTC program and to get that commission in the Air Force. So it was two dual tracks, one to get the technical degree, one to get the commission in the Air Force. And I was successful. And then the other thing was most astronauts had advanced degrees. So then I'm back to John Carroll to get my master's degree, all the while sort of looking forward to a job in the Air Force that would help me to be competitive to apply to become an astronaut. So I expected when I was going to be going on active duty that I would be assigned to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, all the laboratories there, and then start working my way toward being astronaut competitive. They sent me to Sacramento, California, to a laboratory there in the middle of Northern California. And it's like, okay, well, that's kind of weird. But what happened was I met people there at McClellan Air Force Base who had applied to become astronauts. And I said, "What did you guys do?" And they said, "You need to go to Air Force Test Pilot School as a flight test engineer, not as a test pilot, but as a flight test engineer. That'll make you competitive." Because that's what we all did. And so that's what I did. I was there in Sacramento for about 3 years. I applied to attend Air Force Test Pilot School, and I was selected. My wife was not happy because we're going to the middle of nowhere, California. At that point, Edwards Air Force Base is literally in the middle of nowhere. If you've seen The Right Stuff, which, oddly, the movie came out when I was at test pilot school, and it was very much like the movie. The housing was old, but we all at the school lived on the same street, so everybody had the same problems, allowed us to work together, and those kinds of things. But once we graduated, we started applying to become astronauts. Took me a little bit longer than some of my colleagues, but it took me 4 shots. But I was finally selected in 1990, and that was the astronaut group 13.
That's a certain persistence, 4 shots.
It's probably one of the basic things that I learned is just you have to be persistent in this world, no matter what you're aiming for.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you just have to keep working toward it. So
what was the experience like? Ultimately, I believe you've done 4 missions, spent almost a year in outer space, a few spacewalks. What was the nature of what you were doing up there?
every mission that I flew on the space shuttle, because the space shuttle was going really strong when I flew, everyone had a domestic payload, but it also had an international component. And that was one of the things that really struck me. First mission, I deployed a satellite that was developed at Glenn Research Center. Well, at the time, Lewis. So it was really cool. I became the expert on that satellite, deployed it, and it was called the Advanced Communication Technology Satellite. And it operated really, really well. I think way exceeded its design life. And I think basically they just ran out of propellant. So that was the end of the mission. So that was part of that first mission. And then the next part was deploying a German space agency space telescope, sort of a smaller version of a Hubble. And it was basically retrieved by the shuttle robotic arm. And then we captured it, brought it back. So that was cool. In addition to the satellite, it had an IMAX camera on the satellite. So it could take pictures of us while we took pictures of it in IMAX format. So that was pretty cool. And then we were in the run up for the first Hubble repair mission. No one had ever used some of those Hubble tools in outer space. And so I did my first spacewalk testing those tools. It was really a lot of fun.
What is it like doing a spacewalk?
It's just amazing because you're in the shuttle, but when you go outside, you're in your own private spaceship. Your hands, as you move around, become your propulsion, but you have your own life support pack, and you have this fabulous view from the and perspective from the spacesuit. That's much better, less impeded by structure than looking out windows from inside. So it was just mind blowing to be outside doing that first spacewalk, and just the fabulous colors of the Earth. It was just striking. We were busy, but we would take time to look, and it's like, wow, look at that. Just beautiful, the beautiful Earth down below.
Yeah. In the context of that view, I've heard people reflect on it with this sort of profound sense of awe and humility and just like interconnectedness of what it's like to view Earth from outer space, and like almost as a formative transition in perspective, the sort of effect that it can have.
It is remarkable because you have this vantage point, especially when I was on the space station, half a year long, just looking at the Earth, seeing the changes of seasons, seeing the Earth, probably 80% of the Earth at different times of the year. And it's just a remarkable thing to see just the beauty of the Earth, the amazing things, not only on the Earth, but above the Earth. Like, for example, we would look down on thunderstorms in the evening and you could see the tops of the thunderstorms illuminated by the lightning. So we have these these glowing orbs of thunderclouds and you're looking down and you see the tops of those. It was phenomenal. We would look down and see meteors because they're
Yeah.
yeah, it was wild. The other thing was the aurora, and the aurora was just amazing too. Yeah, out of this world, I guess.
Out of this world. So I was really curious about people have a certain tendency we're very adaptable. We were able to just kind of normalize very, even sometimes adverse circumstances.
Yeah.
Did it ever feel normal? Or every day, is it like the experience of awe and focus? Obviously, you're up there to do work as well, but like,
Yeah.
was there ever a sense of like, we're up here now?
On the space station, absolutely. We moved to space, and now I had a family on Earth, so I was always I had one foot in the Earth and one foot in space. But I remember saying to myself, I don't know if I'll be able to walk normally anymore when I go back to Earth because I've been just floating for 6.5 months. And you get really good at it. You can control your center of gravity, you move around fluidly, and it's remarkable just how one you become with that weightless environment. I didn't feel that on the shorter space flights,
Yeah.
but you stay for a long period of time and you get really good at it. I had a friend, a colleague, Susan Helms, and she was single. She basically just moved out of her house and put her stuff in storage, cut up her credit cards. She moved to space.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, it's a remarkable thing. The International Space Station has been up there now, continuously occupied with humans since November of, let's see, 2001. So
It's incredible.
November of 2000, excuse me. Yeah, November of 2000. So it's been a good long time up there. Easily the longest flying, certainly the largest space complex up there. So it's just remarkable.
It really is remarkable. In a similar vein to that, kind of the experiential part of what it is to be up there. One of the things I was curious about here on Earth, I myself am kind of a day person. My brothers are morning and night people. There are parts on Earth where there's extreme light all the time, or it's night all the time.
Yeah.
But up there's a day every 90 minutes or so, like the time cycle of it. What is that like?
So it's pretty cool because when you're looking down, we sort of have a moving map that shows us where we're at over the Earth. And so sometimes you want to see the Earth in darkness, especially if you're flying over like Cleveland, for example, because instead of just seeing the land, you can see all the lights, which basically show you the Interstate 80. It's just really cool because it just gives you a different perspective, night versus day. No matter where you fly, you see some really cool things. And depending upon the cycle of the moon, you can get some fabulous pictures, say, of a moon illuminated Italy. You can see the whole of the boot of Italy with lights down below. So you can see Rome, but it's at night, but you can still see the shape because of the moonlight. It's just a fabulous
That's incredible.
And then there's other places you're flying over Central Africa and there's nothing. There's a few lights. It's just really dark. I mean, it's just amazing to see the difference in the locations on the Earth.
When you think about the work that you were actually doing, the science, the experiments, are there certain exercises that you conducted in space that stand out to you as, particularly interesting or fascinating?
So we did have some experiments where we were the subjects. And so those were always interesting because you are inflicting pain on yourself or just inconveniencing yourself. We had one experiment where when you go to the doctor and they give you a tube and you blow into the tube, see how your lungs are functioning. So we did that multiple times, multiple trials each time. I'm not sure what the outcome was. I think they were looking to see if being in space and microgravity affected your lungs. We did it before and after EVAs because when you're doing a spacewalk, you're at a lower pressure and then surrounded by the vacuum of space. So there are some physiological effects there, and so that experiment gave some insight to the doctors. So those experiments are pretty interesting because obviously we provide our bodies for that. But then I had an experiment where we were growing cancer cells. And you grow cells on Earth, they set up in a planar matter because of gravity. In space, without gravity, they differentiate and they actually grow like a tumor would grow in your body. So
Yeah.
three-dimensional. So I had this experiment.
Wow.
Took about, it was about a 4-week long experiment. I would feed the cells. I would take away the, the waste. And then at the end of the 4 weeks, I put what's called a fixative to stop the cell growth. And then I put all the experiments into a freezer. So, but then the freezer started to have problems. So I spent literally the next 4 months doing daily defrosts, so trying to keep this freezer operating and keeping these samples frozen. So it was an unexpected part of the experiment, but we kept cells alive, and then they eventually were able to go down. We had a space shuttle visit right in the middle of our mission, STS-110, and so we were able to transfer the samples and get them back down to Earth. And they're still doing those experiments in space, and they're doing remarkable things with the results. So I spoke with one of the scientists that work on that program, and he said, "You were the first." It's like, wow, I had no idea. But in hindsight, wow, it was just amazing. And they've made so much progress in cancer research since then, and a lot of it, fortunately, from work that I was able to participate in. Yeah, it's remarkable stuff.
Yeah. Well, and what's really kind of crazy about it, just listening to you explain it, is like we're still human. Things are still going to go wrong. If the freezer is going to break, how do you deal with adversity generally up there? And what did you find was the greatest adversity that you experienced in space? Things not going well.
I flew early on the space station, and so we had our share of infant mortality on systems. So we had an oxygen generator break. You have to, generate oxygen to live. So
Yeah.
it was a little bit sporty, to get the new oxygen generator
Right.
out, get it hooked in, and it didn't work right away. So there were several days of troubleshooting to get the darn thing going. And a big spacecraft that's permanently out in space uses a combination of chemical propulsion and gyroscopic systems to help keep you in your attitude in space. And we had one of those gyroscopes die on us. And these are big things. And it sounded like we had a washer that was out of balance, just going crazy in the middle of this, what's usually a pretty quiet space station. It's going bang, 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 bang. And it's above us. We're working below, and we call the ground, and we think, yeah, Houston, we think we have a problem. They said, stand by. Nothing. And fortunately, they came back and said, no action in your part. Oh, you lost CMG, I don't know, number 4, and no action. But it was a crazy, crazy sound. But probably the thing that really was the oddest thing that happened was we lost complete attitude control. And the space station rolled 90 degrees. We couldn't control it. What's worse, the ground couldn't control it. And so,
Oh my God.
so we worked together with mission control using a combination of the Russian system and our own system to be able to basically reboot the navigation and guidance systems to get all that back online. Meanwhile, we had to direct the solar panels, because originally the solar panels were all automatically driven, and without that navigation system, we became the navigation system. So we had to manually drive those things to keep the batteries charged. So
Yeah.
because if we couldn't keep the batteries charged, the batteries would die, and then it was game over at that time for the space station. So that was probably the sort of the scariest thing, and it took pretty much all day to get everything back up and running.
Wow. Incredible. What do you find was the most fulfilling part of the whole experience?
I think what was really cool, that characteristic of working with lots of different countries and cultures.
Yeah.
And so on that, as the long mission, I had a Russian crew member. We operated a space station which at the time was 50% US and 50% Russian. And that was learning how to operate not only with with the NASA mission control, but also with the Russian mission control. And that was really something. I had to learn the Russian language, had to learn how to operate their systems. One of my spacewalks was in a Russian spacesuit. So I'm doing this hazardous operation in a second language. So that was a sort of a sporty thing. So I think really getting to operate simultaneously in the US system and the Russian system was, I think, something that I never thought I would do, but I'm really glad that I was able to have that experience. The Russians had a very different approach to a lot of things, and so there was always sometimes this dissonance between the US and the Russian approach, and we had to figure out how to make that work.
Yeah. So, as a way to transition to ultimately your transition to the private sector, the
Yeah.
work you did at Orbital and the building of Cygnus, and what is it like returning to Earth?
It was on the shuttle. Our missions were a couple of weeks long, and you didn't have the sort of the changes to your body that you do with a long duration mission. And so we were able, after a short period of time, to get out of the shuttle. We would walk around the shuttle, take pictures of each other, joke around. We were careful because we weren't exactly 100% steady, but it was something, that transition from space to short visit in space to Earth was not that significant. Coming back from a long duration mission, your body has changed. The ability to balance internally has basically, it's got to relearn how to walk. Your circulatory system needs to figure out how to operate in this gravity field that it hasn't had to worry about. I've found myself constantly laying down on the ground to let my blood supply settle in my body, because just having come back from space, the system of veins, and the little valves in your veins, they weren't working. They had forgotten how to work, and so basically the blood would pool in your lower extremities, and you'd start to feel faint. So I would lie down, just prevent fainting until everything lined up again, and then I could get up, walk around. I would lay down, I'd be good for a couple hours, and then lay down again. So, and eventually the next day, your body figures it out. Just the amazing capabilities within your brain to be able to make that adaptation. It's not instantaneous, but it's pretty amazing the way it does that. So,
Yeah, the overall just adaptability.
yeah.
And as your body is going through those physiological transitions, I would imagine your mind and spirit almost has to go through a similar one as you ultimately end up with a job in normal society.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, it was a significant transition coming back from the space station. I think from a mental point of view, our first group of astronauts that trained for the space station, I think we all left the astronaut office within a year. So some people fasted. It was like, just get me out of here. Going through the training for the first time, the stress that we had on ourselves, on families, it was a lot. And so when I got back from space, the NASA administrator said, "Hey, I'd love to give you a job at NASA headquarters." And I said, "I'll take it."
Yeah, yeah.
After about a year, sort of finishing my readaptation, my wife and I moved to Washington, D.C., and I worked NASA headquarters for 5 years, worked on the Constellation program, and then from there transitioned to Orbital Sciences. Well, they basically canceled the Constellation program. So, okay, I get the hint. So, and
Yep, yep.
one of the things, so Mike Griffin was one of the administrators, and he started the Commercial Orbital Transportation System program. He said, "I'm going to give money to commercial operators to build this resupply system for the space station." And
Yep.
so Orbital initially didn't get the award. It was SpaceX and a company called Kistler Rocket Plane. So SpaceX obviously was able to persist and they were successful. Kistler rocket plane just couldn't make it work. So they used a lot of money, but Orbital Sciences then competed for what was left and they won that. And so as they were ramping up, that's when I joined Orbital. But we were building a robotics spacecraft from scratch.
Wow.
Now, Orbital had been building commercial satellites, but to take this basic satellite design and then turn it into something that would go to these human occupied space destinations was a tall order, and NASA was learning as we were learning, and it was really exciting.
It seems all like a tall order to me.
It was at the time. Now, in a way, the Russians had been doing it for years with their Progress spacecraft, and so obviously it can be done. You just have to be able to remotely manage your rendezvous and docking, or in our case, a berthing, using the robotic arm to do the last connection. So you didn't have to worry so much about closing rates, and eventually now all the vehicles do docking. So but at the time it was new and NASA wanted to manage their risk. And so we basically got close and stopped. And then the robotic arm did the rest. But it was really cool to put that capability together. It was not without difficulties, both spacecraft side, and then we had to build a rocket, a spacecraft, and a launch infrastructure. And so we had partnerships. Orbital launches, or now Northrop Grumman launches out of Wallops Island. Well, I guess actually they launch at the Cape now, but at the time we were launching out of Wallops Island, Virginia, but we needed a liquid fueling capability, which the Commonwealth of Virginia developed. And then we developed a rocket, developed Cygnus. And I was primarily a Cygnus guy, but it was really interesting. And we had partners in Japan, partners in Italy. So it was another one of these international activities. And that was really cool.
As you made that transition to the private sector, what was surprising to you about the way the commercial space industry works and just kind of the business of space writ large?
There were a lot of interesting things about that. In the commercial sector, you need money. You need capital. We were developing a new capability that had to meet NASA requirements, and it was not inexpensive. And so Dave Thompson, who was the head of Orbital Sciences, really supported us. He was not happy that it took so much capital, but he really did support us to develop this capability. But it was painful because we were constantly reminded every month of how much it was costing the company. And we were getting NASA funding too, but NASA funding was not enough to cover the development costs. And that's the number one. The other thing is we had to go out to the insurance markets to insure these missions. So it was common practice in commercial communication satellites, but this was a human rated vehicle, and so the risks were pretty much kind of unknown. Where hey, we're building this robotic spacecraft that's going to go and fly itself to the vicinity of the International Space Station. Will you insure us? And I remember going to Lloyd's of London, going to Geneva, Switzerland to talk to the reinsurer Swiss RE, and then also Munich to talk to Munich RE to be able to find people that would insure the part of the mission. That was really cool. But those are the kinds of things: capital and then the ability to have insurance to back you up, so you don't lose your shirt if something goes bad, like your rocket blows up on a launch pad. We had happen.
Yeah, I never even thought about underwriting the risk of what this entails. Yeah, that's fascinating.
The insurance industry really enabled capitalism because it backed up your ability to protect your capital investment. So anyway, those were the things that really stood out to me. And I was fortunate because I was not so much capital part, but trying to explain to these guys who were space guys, but they were commercial communication satellite guys. They really didn't know very much about human space flight. I mean, the good news is because NASA was so demanding in their requirements, it helped to ensure that we would be successful. And I think ultimately that helped when we were going to those insurance markets.
Yeah. You've highlighted the international collaboration aspect a few times. There's this other collaboration between the public and private sector, and I'm curious just how you've seen the relationship between government organizations like NASA and private companies like Orbital and SpaceX and others evolve in the industry, and just how you envision, the future of the business of space and how it should and might look like.
As a good transition point because it's a challenge. In the case of the Cygnus, there was a demand signal from the government saying that we need this service and we think you can make money providing this service to the government. As that's expanded to commercial crew, to spacesuits, to lunar landers, you get a little bit farther away from there's a big market here. And so trying to really understand the market, what you can do, say if your anchor customer decides to go a different way, it's challenging. And because it's commercial, you have to come up with the capital. Elon seems to be able to find capital, and he's been wildly successful. But it does take a lot of money. It takes billions, and you have to be able to find those find those people that have the access to that kind of capital. But it can provide you with the ability to bring in some different thinking too from the private sector, and you can see that the chopsticks
Yeah, yeah.
landing, if you will. Who would
Incredible.
have thought? Who would have thought? It blew me away. And SpaceX willingness to take chances. The last Starship had an issue somewhere. I'm sure they'll figure it out and fix it. But
Yeah.
it was a it was a very rough second stage shutdown. But there's opportunities there, but it's different. And recently, one of the companies that was bidding to build a new spacesuit pulled out. They made a corporate decision. This is costing us too much. And on one side, it's good, but on the other side, if for some reason from a business decision where the expenditure is too great, then companies can say, well, I'm going to walk away.
Hmm.
And that's unfortunate, but it does happen. So it's a new business. The government, so NASA is kind of leading the fleet on this, but other government agencies are saying we don't want to provide that capital for development anymore. You guys bring us the system. And so companies are going to have to be able to go tap those capital markets or take what they have and adapt them cleverly. So it's an exciting time. But it's also a time where it's a difficult time, and the legacy contractors have to figure out how to deal with that. Obviously, the entrepreneurial ones have figured out they need to raise a lot of cash. A lot of them are successful. Jeff Bezos, had his new Glenn rocket. It was a very successful launch.
Yeah.
But he had to step in. He became the face of Blue Origin. So we'll see. In a way, we kind of have a space race. We have a multi-faceted space race where we have these entrepreneurial companies. We have the legacy companies, Boeing, Lockheed Martin, and Northrop Grumman. And then we have this space race with China. So it's really, I think, unprecedented. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's just
Well, and it,
it's just amazing.
yeah. And even just that in the scope of the conversation, we are actually literally talking about going to Mars.
Yes. Yeah. So that was like out of the blue. Hey, we're going to Mars. Really? Oh, okay. So that going back to the moon's hard enough.
Hey.
It really is. Going to Mars. I remember hearing Buzz Aldrin. He's big. Go get your butt to Mars. He said we have to get used to having one-way trips to Mars. So where typically our focus is getting astronauts there and back, Buzz was like, "You're going, you're staying. There's going to be graveyards on the moon." I remember him saying that. It's like, really? Okay. Well, but if you look at pioneers back in the day, they went and they stayed. They didn't go back. Some did, but you're investing in this long trip. A lot of people they're going to settle. Now the problem is you can't really live easily on Mars, and so there's this huge challenge for life support, habitat. I mean, it's an aspiration. I think
It's
it's a good one.
certainly courageous and ambitious.
Yeah, but it's going to take a lot of investment, a lot of careful thought into how you architect a mission to get out there and back. I don't think we have all the technology we need to do this job. The prime example is the propulsion that we have for our rocket engines right now. We have basically the same chemical propulsion that we have had since the Saturn program back in the mid 60s. So here we are, 60 years later, basically the same chemical propulsion. What we need is something like nuclear propulsion. Nuclear thermal is the one that NASA's and the Department of Defense are working on. There's a program called Draco and demonstrate that system. NASA and the Department of Energy, or I guess it was the Atomic Energy Commission at the time, worked on the NERVA program in the 1960s. So we had these
Yeah.
nuclear engines almost running in the 1970s. We've learned a lot about metallurgy, about nuclear propulsion, but it basically doubles your miles per gallon by doing that. So it makes a Mars mission much more doable. You can get there faster, you can get back, and you can reduce the amount of mass that you have to accumulate in space to be able to launch a mission like that. So I think that the propulsion part is going to be, I think, the leader to
Later.
permit astronauts to safely go and come back, at least until we can really build an infrastructural foothold there.
When you think about Draco and other technologies, call it at the frontier of space, and that might allow for us to traverse further, which are the most exciting and interesting to you that we're exploring?
The technology, I think that the nuclear propulsion, when I was at NASA headquarters, we started to do some investment in that area. I'm excited to see that it has continued to move forward. It used to be based at Glenn, the NERVA program that has since transitioned to Marshall Space Flight Center, but they've done a lot of work in the thermodynamics part. The DOE has started working reactor designs. And then at Glenn, they're also working surface nuclear power systems. They recently had an experiment called Kilopower. And that was a very successful collaboration with the Department of Energy, too. So I'm really excited about that. It's better propulsion, better, more plentiful energy. If you have more energy, if you have good propulsion systems, it'll make these long journeys much more safe and reduce the risk. So that's really what I'm excited about. Power and propulsion. I think we can figure out the rest. The life support system. You have backup systems. If one system goes down, you have another one to back you up, and you could make your way through. If you can 3D print replacement parts, that might be a good thing too. But then you have to have a big hunk of printer maybe. So I don't know. We'll see on that. But it's really those basic powered propulsion that I think will really help us as we move forward farther into space. And that'll go for our robotic systems too. When we go and we send our robotic systems to Saturn, for example, you want to go to Titan, which is a really cool place to go. You're using these radioisotope, these tiny little 100-watt power generators. They're minuscule. If you had a fission reactor, you'd have kilowatts of power. So that enables propulsion capabilities with electric propulsion, much better communication redundancy. Yeah, it just really enables a lot. So yeah, fission power, that's the way to go.
That is incredible. I would be remiss if I didn't ask about this topic. The topic being extraterrestrial life and UFOs. What's your perspective on all that?
So, I mean, it's a good question. I remember our first mission, we deployed this advanced communication technology satellite. We had an issue and we had some extra debris that was liberated during the deployment process. So that it was a miswiring in the payload bay. But we had this aluminum debris kind of go everywhere. We're getting toward the end of the mission and we had maneuvered all over. And Bill Reedy and I were looking out the window and we saw what looked like a little beacon of light. It'd blink on, it'd blink off, blink on, blink off. And we're looking at it, it's like, somebody following us?
Oh, wow.
Well, it turned out it was basically some of that debris that was catching light. We were just coming from being in darkness to being in sunlight, and that altitude was just a little bit different. So as it was turning, this little piece of debris, it was doing this beacon thing that looked suspiciously like an extraterrestrial. I think we'll see. It's hard to think that in a universe so big, and if you believe that there are multiverses, something even bigger, that there would be no other civilizations. But I don't think we've been visited in a way that we can conventionally expect how we would be visited with something like the day the Earth stood still or anything. I don't think we've been visited like that. But we'll see. It's just, I'm sure it's just a matter of time.
What was it like being in the only all astronaut band?
It's kind of fun. We ended up playing a lot of unique venues, but in the end, we were musicians. So if we went to Kennedy Space Center or we played in Cleveland several times, people came because we were astronauts. We talked to people, we played music, and my brother. So when I was in high school and college, we had a little band called the Fabulous Blue Moons, and so when we came to Cleveland to play, we did some stuff at Cleveland State, and then we set up and played at a local bar. And so the Blue Moons equipment showed up to provide the sound systems. So my brother sat in on a couple of the songs, so it was kind of cool. But we did another gig, and it was a classic jet airplane group, and they hired us to play music at their event. And these folks are pretty rich folks. They had Chuck Yeager as a guest speaker, so it's kind of interesting because we were all test pilots or flight test engineers listening to Chuck Yeager spin his stories. And then we went to play and everybody left. So here we are. We had driven from Houston to San Antonio, set up the band, and the people that were there, it's like, well, we don't want to hear these guys. We want to go on the Riverwalk. And it was the most deflating experience. And I'm sure people in bands have that experience all the time. But to have an astronaut band, to have everybody kind of walk out on you, it's like, okay, we are chopped liver. So
It's humbling. It's humbling.
it was humbling. But we would go to Kennedy Space Center. We played in Canada, and people loved it because they were space geeks. The classic jet airplane guys had other interests. So anyway, that was just really, it was a long road trip, but it was still fun. We enjoyed it, and it gave us a chance to hear Chuck Yeager, which was kind of cool.
Yeah. So there's truly a universe more worth of questions that I could ask, but I would pose, as we work to bookend the conversation here, if there's anything you feel is left unsaid that feels particularly important, reflecting on the whole experience and journey of everything you've done.
So I think what really stands out is just the international nature of human spaceflight. We have an organization called the Association of Space Explorers, and it was formed back in the Apollo-Soyuz day by Russian cosmonauts and American astronauts. It has since expanded to include the Chinese, to include the Europeans, pretty much every country that sends astronauts into space. And I think that the international nature of human spaceflight is just, it goes across all the political divisions. It's just a really cool thing to see. And no matter whether you're a Chinese or a Russian, there's still that awe of seeing people flying in space, doing really cool science things. We recently had an experience where we went to Holland, and we're in Amsterdam. Actually, we're in Noordwijk. There's the European research base there. And we had a Teams connection with the International Space Station. And so Mike Barrett is one of the astronauts up there. He's floating this laptop around, showing us what's going on real time on the space station, which we've never seen before. And there was a delegation from China, and they were just awestruck where everything they show is always very, very cleaned up and party approved. And here's Mike. He's here's this guy exercising, and this guy's fixing something. He's taking pictures. and it was just so freeform and so American. It was just really cool. So anyway, but the fact is that the Chinese thought this was cool. I think everybody thought it was cool.
Yeah,
it does team.
It is cool.
I mean, amazing. But those are the kind of capabilities that we've developed. And yeah, I'm hoping that we can sort of get back to where we can collaborate more openly in space. So I think we can get past some of these conflicts. They're horrible, don't get me wrong, but we've been able to continue to work with the Russians, but we have to be very careful. It's very challenging, and we still don't really collaborate with the Chinese. We collaborate more with the Soviet Union than we do with the Chinese.
Yeah.
So I think at some point maybe we'll be able to sort of make bridges there as well.
I share your aspiration for that. Certainly. I'll ask you then our traditional closing question, which is for a hidden gem in Cleveland. Something other people should know about that maybe they don't.
Oh, it's the zoo.
That's a great one.
Cleveland Zoo is just fabulous. And we were living at Air Force museums, spaces. And when we came to Cleveland, that's one of the things that we did. We'd go back to the zoo because there was always something cool there. It's such a gem. I mean, the Emerald Necklace, the Metro Parks is so fabulous, but that zoo is just really out of this world.
Well, I mean, it's literally on this world, but compared to everything else you're doing.
There you go.
Well, Carl, I just want to thank you for taking the time, sharing your thoughts. It's fascinating and incredible to hear about.
Oh, well, thank you for the opportunity, Jeffrey. It brought back a lot of good memories.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad to hear that. If people had anything they wanted to follow up with you about, where would you direct them?
I'm on LinkedIn. If they wanted to reach out on LinkedIn, that's probably the best way, and we can start a conversation that way.
Perfect. Well, thank you again, Carl.
Well, you bet, Jeffrey. Thank you, and have a great day.
That's all for this week. Thank you for listening. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's show, so if you have any feedback, please send over an email to jeffrey@layoftheland.fm or find us on Twitter @podlayoftheland or @sternfa, JEFE. If you or someone you know would make a good guest for our show, please reach out as well and let us know. And if you enjoy the podcast, please subscribe and leave a review on iTunes or on your preferred podcast player. Your support goes a long way to help us spread the word and continue to bring the Cleveland founders and builders we love having on the show. We'll be back here next week at the same time to map more of the land. The Lay of the Land podcast was developed in collaboration with the Up Company, LLC. At the time of this recording, unless otherwise indicated, we do not own equity or other financial interests in the company which appear on this show. All opinions expressed by podcast participants are solely their own and do not reflect the opinions of any entity which employs us. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.